Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. It's Friday. The blockbuster came from the Munich Security Conference. 92-year-old George Soros spoke against India. The response was swift and fitting. We'll tell you who this man is, why he's banned in his home country, reviled in many others, and what his motivations are. Meanwhile, India and America are joining hands to take on China. From drones to diplomacy, they're working together on a range of things. A US Senate resolution calling Arunachal Pradesh an integral part of India is the latest in this series. In Israel, a new law takes away the citizenship of terror convicts who get Palestinian money. The law got bipartisan support and some unpopular opinion, while women leaders quitting at the top of their game sets a bad precedent. We'll discuss the headlines first. The latest in the balloon war, China retaliates, imposing sanctions on US defense giants Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. Beijing says this is because they sold arms to Taiwan. Japan vows to spend about $150 billion to address its population decline. That would amount to about 4% of its GDP, twice as much as the country's proposed defense budget for 2027. Japan faces a population crisis with falling birth rates and an aging population. Iran sees its biggest protest in weeks. This comes 40 days after two protesters were executed. The protest began with the death of 22-year-old Masha Amini last September. They've transformed into anti-regime protests. It's raining taxes in Pakistan. Now big businesses will have to pay 4% super tax. The government is desperate for revenue and an IMF bailout. And the family of Hollywood actor Bruce Willis announces that he has dementia. The die-hard star has been diagnosed with frontotemporal degeneration, or FTD. He's 67 years old and retired from acting last year. When Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister of India, there were two hands that pulled the strings. One was the Congress Party, with its symbol of hand. The second was the foreign hand. The Congress has long ceased to be in power, but the foreign hand remains. It's become a bit of a joke too. Every time something goes wrong, governments tend to blame the foreign hand. And this is not unique to India. But does the foreign hand even exist? Yes, it does. Tonight we'll show you what it looks like. This man. His name is George Soros. He has spoken about India again, and this is what he said.
India is an interesting case. It's a democracy, but its leader, Narendra Modi, is no Democrat. Inciting violence against Muslims was an important factor in his meteoric rise. I may be naive, but I expect a democratic revival in India.
Soros was speaking at the Munich Security Conference. India's ruling party was quick to respond.
The man who broke the Bank of England, a man who is known and designated so by a nation as an economic war criminal, has now pronounced his desire to break the Indian democracy.
The debate is all over the news now, but what Soros has said is nothing new. He's been saying it for a while. Listen to this speech from 2020.
Nationalism, far from being reversed, made further headway. The biggest and most frightening setback occurred in India, where the democratically elected Narendra Modi created a Hindu nationalist state, imposing punitive measures on Kashmir, a semi-autonomous Muslim region, and threatening to deprive millions of Muslims of their citizenship.
It's easy to confuse him with an opposition spokesperson, but that would be undermining his clout and influence. George Soros is a man with a messiah complex, 92 years old, extremely controversial, and unabashed about his intentions to bring down governments. A couple of years back, he pledged $1 billion to oust the Modi government in India. Money to fight nationalists, he said. Soros belongs to Hungary, but his native country does not want him. They passed a law in 2018, a dedicated law against George Soros. It's called the Stop Soros Law. It is to stop Soros from funding organizations in Hungary. The man is a Jew, but no friend of Israel. Among his stated missions is the furtherance of democracy. Well, Israel is a democracy, the only one in West Asia, but here George Soros funds NGOs that deny Israel's right to exist. In Palestine, he funds groups like the Al-Haq and Palestinian Center for Human Rights, both associated with a terrorist group called the Popular Front. But how does he fund these groups? By breaking down economies. Soros is said to be behind the Asian financial crisis of 1997. Again, unabashed and unapologetic about the crisis he helped create. Listen to this.
In the last 2 years, you've been blamed for financial collapse of Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, and Russia.
Yeah, all of the above.
All of the above.
Yeah.
Are you that powerful?
No, I think there's a great misunderstanding. I think that I've been blamed for everything. I am basically there to make money. I cannot and do not look at the social consequences of what I do.
Which George Soros am I talking to now? The amoral George Soros or the moral George Soros?
It's one person. It's one person who at one time engages in amoral activities and at the rest of the time tries to be moral.
Rewind further, 1992, an event that has come to be known as Black Wednesday. Soros bet against the British pound. He said it will sink. Other investors followed. The pound came under pressure, so much so that Britain had to withdraw the pound from the ERM, the European Exchange Rate Mechanism. Soros got $1.5 billion in a month, and the title of the man who broke the Bank of England. Today, he's among the 10 richest hedge fund managers in the world. Bloomberg reports that his wealth is over $8.5 billion, but he's donated way more than this sum. Soros runs a foundation called the Open Society. It operates in 70-odd countries, including India. It is headquartered in New York. It's been used to funnel some $32 billion to various countries. Soros is also a political player. He funds parties and individuals. In 2012, he donated $1 billion to a political action committee led by Barack Obama. In 2016, he was the biggest donor to Hillary Clinton's campaign. He spent £400,000 on anti-Brexit groups. A few years before that, he backed Germany leaving the EU. That did not happen, but the pattern is quite clear. He has consistently used his money to influence policy and people. He's been accused of undermining the sovereignty of countries, funding anti-national groups and fueling anti-national sentiment. His mission is to liberate the world from ideas that he doesn't agree with. And his current target is India. The Open Society Foundation started working in India in 1999, but they launched an India-specific program in 2014. What happened in 2014? Narendra Modi came to power. George Soros started pumping money into NGOs in the name of promoting democratic practice and the rule of law. In 2016, the government restricted his activities. He began speaking out on international platforms, and of late, he's been clearly calling for regime change. India goes to polls next year. While the opposition is still finding its bearings, the foreign hand has begun its work in earnest, it seems. First a documentary, now a speech. I'm sure magazine covers and headlines like these will follow soon. But the thing about democracy is this. Despite all the politics and propaganda, the people still have the last word. 2023 will be a defining year for Indian diplomacy. And part of that effort will be India taking on China. As of today, China is India's biggest foreign policy challenge. Same with the United States. China is enemy number one. The US is caught in a cold war with China. India is locked in a border standoff with China. So it makes sense for them to come together. India and the US have joined hands. They're preparing to counter China on three fronts: infrastructure, defense, and diplomacy. Let's tell you how. Infrastructure first. There's a lot happening on this front. India is ramping up its border infra. An all-weather highway, a tunnel that will run through the mountains. This will be in the border state of Himachal Pradesh. It will improve connectivity to Ladakh. India will be able to move troops and hardware faster. This highway will be the shortest route to the border. It will be built at a cost of $206 million and will be completed by December 2025. And that's not all. India is bolstering its border defenses. More soldiers will be sent to the front. Almost 50,000 soldiers are already deployed. Another 9,000 troops will be added. What about China? How many troops does Beijing have? We do not have the exact number, but it's believed that the PLA maintains a similar level of presence at the border with India. The latest border standoff with China began 3 years back. There have been at least 17 rounds of dialogue since. But China refuses to de-escalate, so India is left with no choice but to match Chinese deployments. The US too wants to help India. It is willing to share not just advanced military hardware, but also the know-how to make these weapons. Reports say India and the US are jointly developing UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles. In other words, drones. A prototype is being developed. Its first trials are expected to take place later this year. How does a joint venture help? It's about the ownership of intellectual property or IP. India and the US will share the rights, and this collaboration is not just limited to one project. A few more initiatives are in the pipeline, and this includes counter-drone systems. This is used to detect or intercept drones while they're still in the sky, and an intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platform. How would China assess this development? We don't have a comment from Beijing yet, but safe to say they won't be thrilled. China is already punishing American defense manufacturers. Yesterday, it slapped sanctions on 2 US companies, Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. What for? For arms sales to Taiwan. Beijing is retaliating after the spy balloon scandal, and America's move to shoot it down. Earlier this week, China vowed to take countermeasures. Yesterday, it did.
The Chinese unmanned civilian airship that strayed into US airspace was completely a force majeure accident. But what was tested was the US side's sincerity and ability to properly manage the crisis and stabilize China-US relations. The US side cannot simultaneously seek communication and dialogue while at the same time spreading conflicting lies and escalating the crisis.
The US has called these sanctions symbolic and unnecessary, which brings me to the diplomatic response. There are 2 developments on this front. Number one, a top American official is visiting Taiwan. His name is Michael Chase. He is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense for China. Why is this significant? Because visits by US defense officials to Taiwan are rare. In the last 40 years, 40 years, only one of them has been to Taiwan. So this will be the second visit. Back in Washington, D.C., American lawmakers are pushing for stronger ties with India. And this is the second major development. A resolution has been introduced in the US Senate. It says the state of Arunachal Pradesh is quote-unquote an integral part of India. It supports India's sovereignty and territorial integrity and condemns China, and I'm quoting again, condemns China for its use of military force. Reports say the resolution has bipartisan support in the US, and this could just be the beginning. The momentum is clearly against China, and India-US partnership has immense potential to contain the dragon. Meanwhile, in China, a new scandal has broken out. A billionaire banker has gone missing. His name is Bao Fan. Who is Bao Fan? One of China's most influential deal makers, a billionaire investment banker and a name in Chinese tech scene. Bao Fan has executed some of the biggest mergers, like that of ride-hailing apps Didi and Kuaidi, and food delivery platforms Meituan and Dianping. Bao Fan created a company called China Renaissance. For the last 2 days, he hasn't shown up at his office, and his employees are unable to reach him. No one knows where he is or whether he's safe or not. There is reason to be worried. You see, Bao's company, China Renaissance, was under scrutiny. Its former president, Kong Ling, was being probed. The investigation started in the month of September, and Bao was said to be cooperating. What was this probe about? We don't have the specifics. Now, suddenly, Bao has disappeared, and his company has sent a notice to the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. It is a message to shareholders. I have that message with me. This is what it says. The company has been unable to contact Mr. Bao Fan. The board is not aware of any information that indicates that Mr. Bao's unavailability is or might be related to the business and or operations of the group, which is continuing normally. Just imagine the horror. This is a company telling a stock exchange that it has no idea where its CEO is. Their stock took a nosedive. This morning, shares dropped by 50%. The shareholders are worried, and with good reason. They fear that Xi Jinping's crackdown on billionaires has resumed. In recent years, at least 6 billionaires in China have met the same fate. Authorities have investigated them. They've faced a range of charges from corruption to tax evasion to misconduct. Big names have been targeted like this. Jack Ma is the most prominent one. In 2020, he criticized Chinese regulators, and he lost billions. He had to call off the Ant Group IPO. It led to a loss of $37 billion. Jack Ma himself went missing for 3 months. In 2015, Guo Guangchang got the same treatment. He's known as the Warren Buffett of China. Guo had vanished for several days. As it turned out, he was assisting authorities with a probe. That is the official version. What was this investigation all about? Again, Beijing shared no details. There are other names on the list, like real estate mogul Ren Ziqiang and Tomorrow Group's executive Xiao Jianhua. More recently, Beijing has expanded this crackdown to celebrities. In 2018, actress Fan Bingbing went missing. She was out of the public eye for 3 months. When she reappeared, Chinese authorities slapped a $70 million fine on her. On what grounds? Tax evasion. Even victims of sexual assault are treated in the same way, like tennis star Peng Shuai. In 2021, she wrote a 1,600-word post on Chinese social media where she revealed how she was sexually assaulted by Zhang Gaoli. Zhang Gaoli is a powerful man in China, a former vice premier and a senior politician. Do you know what happened to the tennis player? After sharing her ordeal, she went missing for weeks. She only turned up when the world built pressure on China. The United Nations had to call for proof of her well-being. Major tennis stars like Serena Williams, Naomi Osaka and Novak Djokovic spoke out in support of her. But when Peng returned, she denied making accusations against Zhang. What about the charges of sexual assault? She denied all of them, and China conveniently buried them. The case of Bao Fan could be the latest in the series. Will he meet the same fate as other Chinese billionaires? We don't know the full story yet, but we won't be surprised if that is the case. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, Russia is raining missiles. The target is the city of Bakhmut. It is coming under an intense assault. Ukraine remains defiant. President Zelensky has made a declaration. He has refused to give up on any territory for a peace deal. Experts say neither side can continue in this fashion for very long. They can certainly not keep on fighting because the world doesn't have the ammo to sustain this war. A report says the global war machine is running out of ammunition. Here's more. The missiles are flying from all directions. Ukraine soldiers are at the receiving end. They have made an appeal from the front lines.
Give us more military equipment, more weapons, and we will deal with the Russian occupier. We will destroy them. Together to victory. Ukraine is united and whole. Glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes.
Russia has mobilized its full force for this offensive. Russian forces fired missiles from land, sea and air. Ukraine says there were almost 36 of them. They targeted warships, power stations and industrial complexes. With the war set to complete 1 year, Russia is trying to build momentum on the battlefield. They have boosted their ranks. With 300,000 conscripts joining the front lines, Russia is ready to make another push. Zelensky says the priority now is to hold off the Russian troops.
Today I had a meeting at headquarters and all the commanders of the operational areas took part in it. We heard in detail about the situation in each of the areas and the prospects for each of the operational areas. Weapon supplies, ammunition supplies, training of our military, enemy planes and capabilities, potential of the Ukrainian response, holding the situation at the front and preparing for any escalatory steps of enemy is a priority for the near future.
Zelensky is banking on the West. He has ruled out any peace deal with Moscow, especially if it involves giving up territory. Zelensky believes Any compromise with Russia will make Ukraine weaker. But for how long can they sustain the fighting? Already, crucial deliveries are running late. Last month, several Western nations promised tanks to Ukraine. The commitment was for over 300 tanks. But Kiev has not received even one of them. Reports say the deliveries might take several weeks, if not months. This delay could be dangerous for Ukraine. Russia could be planning a big attack, and there are growing suspicions that an ally could join the fight. Belarus. Russian forces use Belarus as a staging ground. Will Minsk send troops into Ukraine too? For now, President Alexander Lukashenko is ruling out an armed intervention.
We are peaceful people. We know what war is. We do not want war. There's no way we are planning to send our troops into Ukraine unless you show aggression to Belarus from there. That's all. That's my reply, given a long time ago, and I still stand by it.
Either way, Ukraine finds itself in a tight spot. Reports say Ukraine's armed forces are low on ammunition. The stocks are rapidly depleting, and the troops on the ground are forced to ration supplies. They now only shoot when they can see the enemy. The Russians are using up their ammunition too. But Russia has the manufacturing capacity to support a more aggressive offensive. Before the war, the Russian defense industry could make more than 1 million shells in a year. The Ukrainians are nowhere close. They're waiting for help from the West, and time is not on their side. Vantage continues after a short break.
In the British Empire. China disputes this high watershed principle. It says Tibet should not have been the one that was negotiating this boundary. In 1959, then Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai wrote to Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru saying that the LAC was the so-called McMahon Line in the east. After the 1962 war, the Chinese claimed that they had withdrawn to 20 kilometers behind the LAC of now November 1959. India's stand has been that the Chinese should omit the gains from the 1962 war and their line should be
Has it ever occurred to you why people become terrorists? Why do they kill other people? Ideology and faith have a part to play, but so does money. For some, terrorism is an employment opportunity. They're paid to kill. I know it sounds outlandish, but let me assure you, it isn't. That's how global terrorist networks work. They just don't talk about it. In Palestine, it's different though. The Palestinian Authority is open about paying money to terrorists. Pay for slay, they say. Palestinian Authority Martyrs' Fund. The scheme has many names. It is said to incentivize terrorism and violence. And Israel has decided to crack the whip on it. Israel has passed a law to take away the citizenship of terror convicts. They will lose Israeli citizenship, also their status as permanent residents of Israel. This law will directly impact Israeli Arabs, people who do not identify as Israelis yet stay in Israel and are sympathetic with Palestine. The ones that celebrate when Israelis are killed by terrorists and the ones that get money from Palestine to carry out terror attacks in Israel. The law directly impacts them. Now, if they carry out attacks against Israel and then receive money from the Palestinian Authority for those attacks, they will lose their right to live in Israel. They'll be deported to Palestine. The law also impacts Palestinians living in East Jerusalem. A lot of them do not have Israeli citizenship. They have refused it for years. Instead, they have the status of being permanent residents of Israel. But if they are convicted of terror attacks against Israel, and if they accept monthly stipends from Palestine, they will be deported to Palestine. The law's main sponsor is in the Israeli parliament is very clear about what's going to happen now. And I have a quote from what he said. I say unequivocally, a terrorist who receives money from the Palestinian Authority should fly from here to Gaza, anywhere else. Do not stay here. He won't be here. The law has bipartisan support in Israel. It passed the parliament with 94 votes in favor and 10 against. And it's a big win for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's leading what is called Israel's most right-wing government right now. But why was such a law needed? Well, if you're a terrorist that attacked Israel, you and your family will be taken care of. That's how it works. You'll get monthly stipends from the Palestinian Authority. What is the Palestinian Authority? It is Palestine's government in the West Bank. It is led by Mahmoud Abbas. He's been the president since 2005, 17 years and counting, not because he won successive elections, but because there haven't been any elections in all these years. So the Palestinian Authority pays stipends to attackers. The attacks have been on the rise. Last month, a synagogue was targeted. It was widely celebrated in the West Bank. Listen to what Prime Minister Netanyahu said then.
The appropriate answer to terror is to strike it hard and to further deepen our roots in our country. Accordingly, the cabinet is meeting today to prepare for an even broader action against those carrying out terrorism and their supporters in East Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria, while preventing as much as possible harming those uninvolved.
A man involved in such an attack qualifies for an advance payment of $1,700 every month. If convicted, his family gets monthly financial support from Palestine. How much money am I talking about? More than what a Palestinian teacher earns every month, for instance. Palestinian law requires for 7% of the government's budget to be allocated towards making such payments. Sample this. In 2016, some $303 million was spent on these payments. The money was distributed among 35,000 families. In 2021, stipends worth $193 million were paid to terrorists. This is the pay-for-slay scheme. Palestine spends more money incentivizing terrorists than it does on healthcare. The monthly stipend to some terrorists is said to be 4 times higher than the average Palestinian income. They call it a freedom struggle, an intifada. Israel calls it terrorism. It wants to end it. But the new law is also controversial, and Israel is facing a lot of heat. In January, they demolished 132 Palestinian structures. This was an increase of 135% from the same period last year. What is the purpose of these demolitions? To punish people that the Israeli government thinks are terrorists for their attacks on Israel. Experts say at least 1,100 more Palestinian residences are under threat of demolition. The new law is said to have the same rationale, to deter Palestinians from taking up arms against Israel. How does the Palestinian Authority explain these terror stipends? They call them an act of social welfare, and they withstood global pressure to end the practice. I'm talking about pressure from countries like the US, the Netherlands, Germany, Norway, Australia, and many more. So what will be the impact of the new law, the new Israeli law? Will it deter Palestinians in Israel from taking up arms? Well, they now face the prospect of being deported. It's been 18 months since the Taliban returned to power in Afghanistan, but the infighting has not stopped. First, it was over the formation of the government, which took almost a month. It ended with the Taliban supreme leader, Haibatullah Akhundzada, taking charge. Now the fault lines are getting more pronounced. Afghanistan's Interior Minister Sirajuddin Haqqani has made it public. He has accused the leadership of, quote-unquote, monopolizing power and damaging the government in the country. Remember, it's the Taliban we're talking about, an outfit that consists of different ethnic groups and, most importantly, UN-designated terrorists. Speaking of which, the UN has warned of growing terror threats from Kabul. It says terror groups are having a free run under the Taliban. Guess who else has been giving a safe haven to terrorists for years? Pakistan, a nation that the Taliban calls its second home. What does the United Nations have to say about Pakistan? Our next report has the answers.
The Taliban is a divided house. 18 months after returning to power, the bickering in Kabul continues. And this time, it's out in the open. There are two warring factions. One led by Sirajuddin Haqqani, Afghanistan's interior minister and leader of the Haqqani network. The other includes Mullah Baradar and Haibatullah Akhundzada, the top two leaders running Afghanistan. Haqqani took on the Taliban's top brass last weekend, criticizing them publicly. He said, power monopolization and defamation of the entire system have become common. The situation cannot be tolerated any longer. The survival of the government depends on how we treat the people. The previous government was corrupt and did not survive because it repressed and ill-treated people. If we treat people well, our government will last longer. These disagreements aren't new. For long, the Taliban has tried to play down the factionalism. The latest spat comes after Akhundzada brought in a slew of repressive measures. These include banning women from schools, universities and workplaces. Also from travelling long distance without a male relative. Haqqani's faction is said to have been among the moderates that is seeking legitimacy on the international stage. The Akhundzada camp slammed them for their public remarks. Here's what the Taliban's chief spokesperson said. Our Islamic ethics bind us to not publicly criticize or vilify the emir, minister or a government official. You must approach him and convey your criticism privately and safely so no one else will hear it. Experts say this infighting could spill into a civil war. The United Nations has flagged other concerns. It says Afghanistan remains the primary source of terror threat for Central and South Asia. And the Taliban's comeback has given terror groups a free run. ISIL's main goal is to portray the Taliban as incapable of providing security in the country. It also threatened to launch terrorist attacks against Chinese, Indian and Iranian embassies in Afghanistan. Apart from high-profile attacks, ISIL-K conducts low-level attacks nearly daily, causing fear in local communities, targeting Shia minorities to undermine Taliban Pashtun authority, and challenging nascent security agencies. What about Pakistan, Taliban's brother-in-arms? On last count, Pakistan was home to 81 extremist groups. It has a record of providing safe haven to many top terrorists. Al-Qaeda chief Osama bin Laden, his successor, Ayman al-Zawahiri, Jaish-e-Mohammed founder Masood Azhar, and Taliban leader Sirajuddin Haqqani, Mullah Baradar, and even Hebatullah Akhundzada. The Pakistani Prime Minister is busy looking for answers that he already has.
As per my information, in Pakistan, including this province, these terrorists have not occupied an inch of land. They are moving around and this is a very good sign. But the questions of how they were able to reach here, who brought them here, these are the questions that the nation wants answers for.
The Prime Minister believes terrorists moving around is good news, but the chickens are coming home to roost. The Pakistani Taliban is taking on the government. A suicide blast in a Peshawar mosque killed more than 100 people last month. Reports say Pakistan now wants Akhundzada to rein this group in. So while the terror threat from Afghanistan continues, and UN rightly flags it, it cannot discount Pakistan's role in this game.
Our next story is about something that affects over 1.8 billion people every month. In fact, it is affecting over 300 million people today, or on any given day for that matter. 1.8 billion people across the world menstruate. This includes girls, women, and transgender and non-binary persons. Yet talking about periods can often be a taboo subject. We avoid the word itself. We say things like time of the month and even feeling or getting down. Well, today's story about periods may seem quite uplifting. Spain has approved the creation of a sick leave. It allows women suffering from incapacitating periods to take up to 5 days off from work. This law is being hailed as historic. And why not? Spain has become the first country in Europe to do this. But is this law important? Will it actually achieve what it sets out to do? After all, Spain is not the first country to pass such a law. Does period leave really help those who menstruate? Do they even use this leave? Our next report tries to answer all these questions. The Spanish Parliament has finally approved the creation of period leave. Women suffering from incapacitating periods will be able to take up to 5 days off. This is being hailed as a historic decision, not just for Spain, but also for Europe. Spain is the first European country to pass such a reform. It is part of a broader law. It eases abortion limits for those aged 16 and 17 and allows free menstrual products in schools and prisons. Equality Minister Irene Montero is seen as the driving force behind this law. She already predicts the problems in its implementation, though. Montero says there will be resistance to its application, just as there has been resistance to the application of all feminist laws. This law was supported by the left-wing coalition, opposed by conservative and right-wing parties. The law has been a long time in the making. The ruling party was divided too. It feared that the law could backfire and stigmatize women in the workplace. Many say it would discourage employers from hiring women. Women are already asked questions that men are not, like will they quit their job to become a mother, and how long they'll take to return to work after giving birth. Will period leave also invite a trail of uncomfortable questions? We hope not. But there's no denying that this law could become another handicap for women finding jobs. Then there are concerns about the details of policy. Periods can be unbearable and disabling, but are they severe enough to be considered an illness? By the way, Spain is not the first country in the world to implement this law. Japan, Taiwan, Indonesia, South Korea, and Zambia offer period leave, but it's rarely used. Japan introduced the policy in 1947. In 1965, around 26% women availed of it. But by 2017, the figure dropped to less than 10%. In South Korea, in 2013, about 24% of women used the leave. By 2017, it was less than 20%. Why is this happening? From gender pay gaps to low shares of female managers, women already face an uphill battle in the workplace. Taking a period leave can be seen as not being as good as men, or not taking work seriously enough. Cultural factors also play a role here. Sanitary napkins and tampons are still given covered in brown or black bags. In such a situation, are women even comfortable talking to their peers about periods, let alone talking to their bosses? On the other hand, laws like these are being seen as a start to combat stereotypes surrounding periods. Menstrual-related symptoms vary from person to person, but most people experience a range of side effects. This includes cramps, muscle aches, migraines, and fatigue, even diarrhea or constipation. Women suffering from reproductive or ovarian disorders have it worse. Doctors say that sometimes period pain can hurt as much as a heart attack. The reality is, most women try to push through and go to work anyway. They're expected to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. The law in Spain may or may not help, but it has definitely triggered more conversation around the topic. It is helping people recognize the reality of their bodies. Maybe it will encourage them to seek the support that is required. And talking of leave, the great resignation seems to have hit some of our leaders, and they all happen to be women. Coincidence or not, the question we are asking is this: why are women in power quitting their jobs? Just this week, 2 high-profile women have stepped down. Yesterday, YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki quit her job. A day before, Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon resigned. In January, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern resigned. Last year, Meta's COO Sheryl Sandberg stepped down. So why are women, when it comes to top jobs, leaning out instead of leaning in? Because if you're a woman who has achieved professional success, then you know just how hard it is to get a seat at that table. So why are so many voluntarily getting up from it? Let's talk about the politicians. Nicola Sturgeon has been the longest-serving First Minister of Scotland. The First Minister is the head of the Scottish Government. Her resignation came as a shock to many.
Since my very first moments in the job, I have believed that part of serving well would be to know, almost instinctively, when the time is right to make way for someone else. And when that time came, to have the courage to do so, even if to many across the country and in my party, it might feel too soon. In my head and in my heart, I know that time is now.
Sturgeon knows a thing or two about breaking the glass ceiling. But while announcing her decision, she spoke about the pressures of the job and how brutal it can be and how she is a human after all. Which may sound familiar because you heard the same last month.
I think the cumulative challenges that we've faced as a team, and they have been extraordinary, has taken its toll. I consider this job a privilege, but I am also human.
Both Ardern and Sturgeon were popular leaders, till they weren't. They remain social media darlings, especially Ardern. She was handsomely praised for making history at the United Nations, for being the first world leader to attend the UN General Assembly meeting with her baby in tow. But that was then. Recent reports say their ratings were dipping and their policies were being questioned. Ardern faced criticism over the COVID response and the economy. Sturgeon faced flack over her stand on Scottish independence and gender reforms. So they were under pressure. But my question is, which head of state is not? Just ask Joe Biden, Xi Jinping, Shehbaz Sharif, Vladimir Putin, Volodymyr Zelensky, or anyone else you can think of. These are world leaders with the most problems right now. Look at Biden. He faces an election next year. His cup of woes is overflowing, both at home and abroad. Economy, China, the Russia-Ukraine war, North Korea, you name the problem and he has it. But this 80-year-old is not ready to quit. Far from it. He is in fact ready to run for re-election. His tank, unlike 42-year-old Ardern's, is far from empty, or so he claims. Shehbaz Sharif's country, Pakistan, is on the verge of bankruptcy. Zelensky is on the verge of a meltdown over lack of fighter jets from the West. Xi Jinping is dealing with balloons and viruses and everything in between. And Putin started a war he has not been able to win yet. Different leaders, different problems, but no one is quitting. So while some are praising Ardern and Sturgeon for being true to themselves and knowing when to stop, others are talking about the message it sends, especially to young girls who look up to these leaders as role models. I know what I'm saying is politically incorrect, but someone has to say it, I think. When the pressure builds, is quitting the answer? Remember the saying, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. There is no denying that women in positions of power have an additional burden, the burden to constantly prove that they can do it all. You're expected to look like a girl, act like a lady, think like a man, and work like a boss. It's not easy, but no one said it was. And giving up is definitely not the solution. It's not like it can't be done, because so many others are doing it, have done it in the past. In fact, when it comes to women leaders who have persevered, the subcontinent can teach a thing or two to the so-called first world. From India's Indira Gandhi to Pakistan's Benazir Bhutto to Bangladesh's Sheikh Hasina, and England's very own Iron Lady Margaret Thatcher. Let me tell you what she famously said once. If you want something said, ask a man. If you want something done, ask a woman. Save that, I say. And think about this. Is there any virtue in giving up? The road to the boardroom or the parliament is not an easy one. It was never supposed to be, neither for men nor for women. But times have changed. Women are breaking barriers and ceilings everywhere. And while it's no longer acceptable, and rightly so, to say that boys don't cry, we also believe that girls don't quit. So when you get a seat at the table, stay put. Is America having its Chernobyl moment? People in Ohio certainly think so. These are residents of East Palestine. It is a small town in America. It's called East Palestine. A train carrying toxic chemicals derailed near this town. Then the derailed bogies caught fire. This was 2 weeks ago. People were evacuated. They're now returning to discover the full impact of the disaster. Many say they're suffering from headaches, sore throats, and a burning sensation in the eyes. There are reports about pets and other animals dying. Thousands of fish turned up dead in the nearby Ohio River. So is it really safe to return? What are the long-term impacts of this chemical spill? And what's being done to fix the situation? The town's residents wanted answers from the railway firm that operated the train. There was supposed to be a town hall on Wednesday. The representatives of the firm did not show up. Here's more.
On the night of February 3rd, a train derailed in the town of East Palestine in the US. It's a small town of about 5,000 people in the state of Ohio. When the train derailed, it caught fire. Some of the cars contained toxic chemicals. Among them was vinyl chloride, a known carcinogen. It's also flammable. The bogies transported it could explode. An alarm was sounded, the area was evacuated. Authorities conducted what they called a controlled release of the toxic gas. It created an ominous black cloud that engulfed the skies. A toxic mushroom cloud shrouded parts of Ohio. You see, vinyl chloride doesn't become safer after you burn it. On the contrary, it releases two toxic gases, hydrogen chloride and phosgene. These are now in the atmosphere. Vinyl chloride wasn't the only chemical in the train. Many others were leaked into the town. These chemicals are used to make plastics and paints. Now they're in the air and water. People were allowed to return last week. They're complaining of headaches, nausea, dizziness, sore throats, eye, nose and skin irritation. In the long term, people are susceptible to cancer too.
Saturday, we were in my room, which I had the door closed and it didn't smell in there. But my son came out and he was like, "Oh my God, it stinks, Mom. It smells like paint thinner." And I'm like, "No, it doesn't." I got up and come out and it smelled like really, really strong paint thinner. And then his eyes turned like bloodshot and he started coughing and I was like, "Yeah, we're leaving." So we hurry up and grabbed as much as we could and we took off.
The firm that ran the train refused to attend the town hall. The derailment has caused potentially irreversible damage. Some people have lost their pets. The local wildlife is dying in droves. Many people are now considering leaving the town, a town some of their families have inhabited for hundreds of years. The train was carrying hazardous cargo, but it did not bear a high hazard classification. This would have ensured better safety precautions, but the firm's excuse is that only a few bogies were carrying the toxic chemicals.
We are absolutely going to hold Norfolk Southern accountable, and I can promise you that.
The important thing to me is that we hold, as the administrator said, that we hold Norfolk Southern accountable.
So we're going to get through this together. We're going to hold Norfolk Southern accountable.
Is this a promise of justice, or is it just passing on the buck? Will the victims ever be fully compensated? In the case of Chernobyl, the city is a ghost town. People can never go back to their ancestral home. In Italy, an accident took place at a chemical plant near Milan in 1976. Toxic gases polluted the surrounding areas. Studies have found how the locals became more susceptible to cancer. The technical director of the company was sentenced to just 2 years in prison for the negligence. And India's Bhopal gas tragedy victims still await justice. The then CEO of Union Carbide fled India and never faced prison. More often than not, companies pay some damages and the people responsible escape punishment.
And finally, it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. Turkey and Syria continue to deal with the devastation left behind by earthquakes. Christ the Redeemer in Rio de Janeiro, one of the 7 wonders of the world, was illuminated to pay tribute to the victims. In Germany, people did a countdown to 11/11. It is considered the magical hour. This was part of a carnival in the city of Cologne. Sharjah in the UAE is famous for its mosques. One of them was lit up for a festival. It highlighted the aesthetics, architectural details and designs. You don't want to miss this one. And finally, in the UK, an 85-year-old woman zip-lined 500 feet above the ground. This is the fastest zip line in the world and the longest in Europe. As they say, you're only as old as you feel. Thanks for watching. Have a good weekend. We'll see you on Monday.
integral part of India. First, let's break down what this resolution says. It begins by saying that since the Sino-India War of 1962, the United States has recognized the McMahon Line as the international border between China and the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh, and that the US recognizes Arunachal Pradesh not as a disputed territory, but as an integral part of the Republic of India, and this recognition is not qualified in any way. The resolution also says that China claiming Arunachal as its territory is part of an increasingly aggressive and expansionist policy. It lists instances of the PLA's provocative moves at the line of actual control and alleges that this is upending the India-China relationship, and it has led to the Galwan Valley clash that we saw in 2020, resulting in the death of 20 Indian soldiers and many more Chinese soldiers as well. The resolution also states that China's provocations impede poverty alleviation and economic development in Arunachal Pradesh. So why is this resolution then such a big deal? This is the first time that there is a detailed resolution echoing India's position on Arunachal Pradesh and wider Chinese aggression at the line of actual control. This is the first time such a resolution has been moved in the Senate. It goes beyond just condemning China's actions to explicitly supporting India for the position it has taken vis-a-vis Chinese actions. And it is bipartisan in nature. This particular resolution has the support of both the progressive wing of the Democratic Party as well as the conservative end of the Republican Party. So what exactly is the line of actual control? How did it come into existence, and why is it such a thorn between India and China? Now, the LAC separates Indian-controlled territory from Chinese-controlled territory. In fact, India and China do not
Hello and welcome to CNN News 18 with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwal. Breaking news coming in from Pakistan, where a dastardly attack by terrorists has struck the Karachi police headquarters, which is currently under siege. Terrorists wearing police uniforms have attacked the police headquarters and have now taken up positions on the roof of the building, ladies and gentlemen. Heavy gunfire is still ongoing. The Tehreek-e-Taliban has claimed responsibility for this attack. 2 deaths have been confirmed. 3 personnel from the Pakistan Rangers have been injured. That's the piece of breaking news that's coming in. Those visuals on your screen coming in from Karachi, where heavy gunfire is still taking place, where terrorists dressed as police personnel attacked the Karachi police headquarters. Now, reports suggest they have taken control of the rooftop of the police headquarters and are firing at the other police personnel over there. And they have taken control of that entire complex, and the TTP has claimed responsibility for this attack. 2 deaths have been confirmed so far. I'm joined by my colleague Abhishek Jha to get more details with this ongoing security situation in the heart of Karachi. Ladies and gentlemen, Abhishek, what more details can you get for us?
So, Ayushman, as we are talking, there are reports that major explosions have taken place inside on the rooftop of the building, so much so that the shock of that blast could be felt across the area. And there are still police personnel very much inside the premise. We know that number of terrorists who are all wearing police uniform are still not